So good evening, everyone. It's so nice to see you virtually today. It is, what is it? It's 9 a.m. on Saturday morning here in America. I'm in Eugene, Oregon on the West Coast, and we're having really beautiful weather right now. It's sunny and cool, but it's not sunny and rainy, or it's not cold and rainy like it usually is. Um, we tested this yesterday, and I think there's a pretty good time lag between my voice and the picture. So I'm sorry if that's happening, but I think it's because of the distance. Just to introduce myself very briefly, my name is Andy Noonan. Right now, I'm a teacher at the University of Oregon in the American English Institute. This is one of the maybe three biggest programs in the United States. I think there's 100 teachers, 100 English teachers spread out over three or four different sections. What I've been teaching is reading, writing, grammar level 5. If they pass level 6, they can enter the university as a real student. I'm also working with graduate students who are getting their masters in teaching English. And I also work on the e-learning platform. I'm sure some of you have taken some of the e-learning classes. A lot of those go through the University of Oregon. So you actually, maybe you know my colleagues. Before coming here, I was in Russia for 2 years in Kazan as a senior English language fellow. My wife and I absolutely miss Russia. At least once a week, we think, it'd be really nice to be in Russia right now. We miss a lot of the things about being there. We don't miss how cold it is right now in Kazan. And then before the 2 years in Kazan, I was in Taiwan for a year, and then I've done teacher training in Korea, Cambodia, Turkey, Ukraine, Georgia, and I was spent 8 years in Japan as a teacher, and my wife is Japanese. I found her on my last few years in Japan. Irina, nice to see you. I saw you in Surgut, I guess. That already seems like a long time ago. So today I'm talking about teaching culture, and my interest in teaching culture comes from my days at SAT. That was my graduate school in Brattleboro, Vermont, and I think they have the oldest masters in teaching English program maybe in the world, maybe at least in the States, and it's older than anything in England. And one of their primary focuses is on teaching culture. They have a teacher there named Pat Moran. You'll see the link to his book. And a lot of what I'm talking about today is me trying to figure out how to use his ideas in my classroom. So the plan today is I'm going to show you a couple different, we're going to talk about culture, the nature of culture, what some considerations before we think about lesson planning. And then I'm going to show you a couple lessons that I do. And we'll talk about kind of the format of those lessons, these two frameworks that Pat Moran invented and how we can use those kind of very, very easily. I want to give you something that you can take away from today and use in your class next week. We'll talk about how those frameworks are used in different kinds of lessons, and then I'm going to open it up to you and hopefully have you guys share some ideas of how you might use these frameworks or how you might use these ideas. Okay, great. Then maybe some of you have seen this. Don't press that button. Some of you have seen this, but this is one of the most common metaphors when we talk about teaching culture or when we talk about culture in general. If you ask 12 blind men, or in this case, we have 6 blind men, to describe an elephant, and each blind man goes to a different part of the element and feels it very, very carefully, and each one reports back what they've found. Each person will give us kind of a very different idea about what what it is they're feeling. So this guy on top, where do I have him? This guy here, he's feeling the ear. And so what he reports back to his friends is, well, this thing it's a fan. It's you use this on a hot day to keep yourself cool. While the guy up front here, he's feeling the tusks and he's reporting back to everyone else, no, or that's not what this is. This is a weapon. You would use this to hunt for food or maybe to defend yourself. The guy in front here, again, feeling the trunk now, and he's saying, no, this is what I'm feeling is a snake. It's a great big snake. And so each person is getting a different part of the idea. And it's not quite correct. They're correct in their own little way about their own small part of what they can feel and what they can sense. But it's not until all those ideas come together, until those people collaborate and put their ideas together, that they get maybe the fuller picture of what the elephant is. And I think that's a really nice metaphor for describing how we learn culture and how our students react to cultural elements that are presented to them. One student will feel one thing about this, for an example, why hamburgers? And one student will have an idea about why this is, and a completely different idea, and he's a little bit correct. And you put those ideas together in a collaborative way, then we have a better picture of what this cultural element maybe means. I think what this means for our classrooms is we need to be building an environment where students trust each other enough to kind of go on this journey together, that they trust each other, that yes, this answer is a little bit correct, and yes, this answer is a little bit correct, but yes, let's use these to come together and see if we can come up with the whole idea together. So that's kind of the starting point for teaching culture. And it's something to keep in mind as we're going through this and as you see the practice exercises, because there's a lot of places for blindness in these lessons, for people to feel different parts of the elephant and give you kind of partial answers. So the question is begged, why teach culture? And this student said this to me in spring term. I think she said, Andy, were you disappointed when your daughter was born and she had brown eyes and brown hair? And I was absolutely shocked by this question. But if you think about it, she comes from a country where 3 billion people have brown hair and blue eyes, green eyes, blonde hair, light brown hair is kind of an exotic and desired thing. But what this really shows to me is this student is really approaching the world from only her cultural background. She's only seeing the world from Chinese eyes, and she's not able to see how maybe I would see the world as an American. And of course, when I was not disappointed that my daughter has brown eyes and brown hair, I've got blue eyes. Everybody in my family has blue eyes. Brown eyes is exotic to me. This also happened, I think, in that same class. A Japanese girl says, "You ate wolf? That's crazy." And the Chinese boy responded, "But don't people in your country eat whale?" And the Japanese girl, bright eyes, happy as can be, "Yeah, but whale is delicious." And again, for me, this shows that my students are not approaching cultural differences from anything but their own perspective. The Japanese girl is responding and judging basically this Chinese boy for something that happens within his culture. And then when it's turned back on her, she's not able to kind of critically analyze the rather sharp comment by the Chinese boy that really these cultures are the same. There's food in your culture we think is weird, and there's food in mine that you think is weird. And again, this showed me that I need to do more work with culture in my class to try to promote critical thinking and create kind of questioning minds. One more example of this, and this is actually from Kazan, where I heard an access student. He was ethnic Russian, I believe, and he turned to me as we were on a school trip, and he was talking about 2 other access students. 15, 16-year-old kids. And he said to me, they're speaking Tartar. That's stupid. Tartar is useless. And again, same thing. I want this boy to be able to look at another culture critically without just judging it and throwing it away. But these are three kind of sharp examples from my own experience that happened, relatively recently. But really, I think we have these moments all the time where our students are showing us that they're not approaching kind of the mystery or the strangeness or the otherness in a kind of a critical way. They're doing it in kind of a throwaway. I'm going to judge you. Now I'm going to be done with you. So that's what my ultimate goal of teaching culture is approaching, solving some of these issues. I loved Kazan. So some other reasons that we teach culture, and I'm sure you guys know these, but I'll go through them very quickly. Language and culture are inseparable. One teaches us about the other. I was trying to think of an example, and I was thinking the example of young Americans who walk around and say, "Hey, what's up?" And the other guy says, "What's up?" And unless you know the kind of the culture behind that, it seems very mysterious, because what's up is a real question, meaning, what's going on in your life or what's happening with you right now. But the answer 90% of the time is a simple what's up. It acts like a hello, but it's mainly the young men and young women to a certain extent who are using this. And I think that it's acting as a hello or a how are you or a hi, but all of those are too formal to these to the younger generation. And what's up has a certain element of coolness to it. So I think teaching what's up by itself, the students maybe would be very confused, but if they know the culture behind it, it's going to be more understandable to them, and they're going to know when to use it and who to use it with. I think many of you would agree with this, that when cultural topics are brought up in class, students are usually, in my experience, have been very motivated by these topics. If my students are motivated, they're more engaged to learn, and I can be a more effective teacher. So right there, bringing in cultural elements means my classroom teaching is going to be more effective simply because my students are more interested. A lot of textbooks approach teaching culture with this in mind, that teaching culture helps people find their way in foreign cultures. It seems like the main emphasis. A lot of textbooks you'll open up, it'll be, let's read about Sydney, Australia, or here's Ayers Rock in the outback of Australia, and all of that's very interesting. But I'm actually more interested in it helps students talk about their own culture. I know from years of being in Japan and using textbooks there that students were very savvy about London or New York or Seattle or all of these Western countries and cities. But when I would ask them about Buddhism or maybe a major church in their city, they couldn't explain it at all because they didn't have that language. So bringing in that language and bringing in elements from the student's own culture allows them to talk about themselves, and I think that gives them kind of a lot more communicative freedom, and it gives them places to enter into conversations where they might not have if they stick to these kind of older type course books. Okay. It increases chances for critical thinking, and my general feeling was in Russia, the critical thinking was already at a fairly high level. I'm speaking now because I'm teaching a lot of Asian students who their learning is basically memorization. And so when I ask them to go down some of these kind of critical thinking modes, it's very, very difficult for them. But even if Russia has a higher level of this is still something we can be working on. And I'm hoping to be here next week to see how Tony Hull approaches this. And like I mentioned before, I think the ultimate goal of teaching culture is creating open-minded world citizens who are able to question mystery rather than dismissing or judging it. And I think that's a lofty goal. And I think we can only do this piece by piece, little by little. A lot of it's planting seeds where maybe I put this idea in my students' head, but they resist, and maybe 3 years from now, they've got a new teacher, they're having a new life, but that seed kind of blossoms, and now they're able to look at things more critically, and maybe more open-mindedly. Okay, still pressing the button. Anastasia mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, big C, little c. Today, we're mostly concerned with little c culture. And when I say little c culture, I'm talking about the everyday things we do. The hairstyles, the clothes we wear, what we say to our friends, what we say to our loved ones in the morning or in the evening, how we drive our cars, what kind of cars we drive. That's the little c everyday culture. And that's what the frameworks that I'm going to show you are more about dealing with that than big C culture, which is like the architecture and the arts and the ballet and the opera. Those have things to teach us, but I think the little C culture is the things that maybe the students aren't aware of. And that's what I want them to be aware of, because it'll help them, again, actually behave in those cultures more appropriately. Anastasia, I agree. Big C culture is important. Yeah, but these frameworks, the way I use them is mainly centered about little c, and that's what we're going to be looking. Here's another metaphor, and this is often thrown about when we talk about culture, and I mentioned it a little bit earlier with the judgment. So, with culture is like an iceberg, because like an iceberg, you can only see a little bit of it. And how we can see culture is it's in the products, the things of a culture, the people that are in a culture, maybe the communities that are in a culture, and then the things that people do within a culture. We can see these things very easily, but that's really kind of the surface level things. And I want my students to go deeper than that. I like this graphic because the next section is about the attitudes, the positive or negative opinions or feelings about the culture that they're finding. And this is where my Tartar student said, or my Russian student said, Tartar is stupid and it's useless. Or my Japanese student said, oh, you ate wolf, that's crazy. I think those judgments and those opinions and feelings are important, but we need to move beyond those. And the ultimate goal is to get down into this very, very deep part, which is the beliefs and values, the deep level assumptions about these cultural things and the perspectives. This is kind of the perspectives part. The perspectives are what gave us the products and what gave us the practices. I see there's a question here. Not questions for me. Okay. I mentioned this briefly before, but it's been my personal belief that if we start with our students learning about their own culture before moving on to the cultures of other countries or other nations, then I think they're going to be in a better place to judge them more critically or to talk about them more critically. And when I talk about culture one, I'm ideally if I was teaching in Russia, I would be teaching, I would bring in positive aspects or be eliciting positive aspects of Russian culture, things that Russians do or have that are just absolutely beautiful. And I know from living there for 2 years that there's some absolutely beautiful cultural elements of Russia. Talk about these, instill a sense of pride that, your country does some fantastic things, and the way you treat each other is sometimes absolutely wonderful. And then I would bring in some negative aspects and have your students going out and doing some research, finding things that they think are negative about Russian culture. Again, talking critically about them. Where does this come from? What are the perspectives behind it? Once they've done that with their own culture, I think they're in a better place to judge or talk about other cultures, to then look at American culture critically. Again, the positive things and the negative things. And from Anastasia's presentation a couple of weeks ago, she had this slide, which I stole. I love it when somebody smarter than me has written something that agrees with something I thought, and that's what this did. This idea that sociocultural competence is based on the ability to decently express your own culture in a foreign language rather than on readiness to speak about the culture of a target language. So again, this idea that let's approach our culture first before we start looking at other cultures. And I believe very strongly in that. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So the first framework that I'm bringing you today, and you can see this is the book that this comes from down in the corner. The first framework I bring in for teaching culture is called the Cultural Elements Framework. And what the Cultural Elements Framework does is it divides culture into 5 areas. The products, the practices, the persons, the communities, and perspectives. Just to give you a little example of each one, and I'm going to give you a chance to do this in a moment. When I was thinking about American culture this morning, and so I lived overseas for about 15 years. I've been back in America now for a year, and kind of the reverse culture shock I have has been amazing. There's some things that have really surprised me about being in America. One of the products that I see that really surprises me and shocks me and makes me a little angry are the huge trucks. People just own absolutely gigantic Ford and Chevy and Dodge trucks. They're so big they don't fit into a normal parking space. You need a small ladder to get into them. And the idea behind them is, well, I have a lot of work to do. I need to cut down wood and I need to move things, so I need this gigantic truck. But a lot of them, people just do it because they like really big things. But if you're driving behind them, it's hard to see, and if they hit you, of course, they're going to win. So that's one thing. That's an American cultural product that has shocked me. A cultural practice. Now that I'm back at the university, girls here wear yoga pants to class, and these are extremely tight, extremely thin pants. And when I left America 15 years ago, people were, they were wearing jeans and things were a little bit more modest. And so this is one practice, this wearing yoga pants to class, that seems kind of shocking to me in a way. Person, kind of an American person that you're probably reading about in the news is the American policeman. And I think the American policeman is different from a Russian policeman or an Italian policeman. The policemen here in a lot of places act very macho, and they really like pushing people around. There's a lot of racism attached to them, and in some places they can be extremely kind, but there's kind of they have their own kind of atmosphere and feeling about them that's different than policemen in other countries. A community, an example of a community would be joggers. Now that I'm back in America, I see groups of joggers are everywhere. They gather on the weekends to have meetings. And they can talk about their own thing. When they're with each other, they have kind of their own language about talking about things. They have their own magazines that they read, their own, kinds of programs they watch on TV together that they can discuss on the weekend. And it's really kind of not a community that when they're together, they're really, they have their own thing going on, different from the individual. And finally is the perspectives. Perspectives are harder to see. Perspectives are what underlies the other 4 cultural elements. But we can see perspectives in things like proverbs. So a very common American proverb is the customer is always right. And how does that work in Russia? Very different idea in different countries. But the fact that in America we think the customer is always right, so you go into a restaurant and if there's something wrong with your food, you can send it back. Even if there's really kind of nothing wrong with the food, you can still complain and send it back, and the person who's serving you will do that. She will take it back without a problem, without really questioning it. She may complain about you in the back room, but she's working for tips, and so she needs your tips, so she's going to be kind of super, super kind. No, Anastasia, it doesn't always work in Russia. I was amazed at some of the customer service I received in Russia, which I'm not saying it was a bad thing, but just very interesting to me. And yes, Natasha, it does depend. It depends on where you are and the person you're dealing with. Okay, now I'm going to give you a chance. So I'm going to show you a series of pictures, and these are pictures that I took in Russia in my 2 years. And I just want you to very quickly tell me, and you can add this in the chat box, so which cultural element do you think we're looking at here? So here is a lock on a bridge. Is this a product, a practice, a person, a community, or a perspective? Anastasia says practice. And Natalia says product. Yeah. So it goes back and forth on that, and I would agree. I think the lock itself is the product. The fact that they've written their names on it. Who is it? Ildar and Elena, who were married in 2011. Good luck to them. That lock is the product, whereas putting it on there, symbolizing their forever love, is the practice, right? Yeah. I had a teacher in Kazan who said, I've been married 3 times. Each time I have to go back and clip off the old lock and throw it in the river. Another cultural practice. But in America, we don't do this. Apparently in Europe, this is done. Okay, how about this one? Okay, so we're getting some different answers to this one. I'm interested. Let's see. Svetlana said communities, and I'm interested in that because, well, you might want to explain that to me a little more. For me, I see a person. And this was something kind of typical I saw in Russia. Was maybe an older woman outside doing a lot of kind of heavy work. And so for me, that could be a person, and also she's shoveling the snow, which is an obvious Russian practice. I think that's a cultural practice that's maybe common worldwide, and I'm more interested in things that are more special to the culture, or more centered in the culture. So for me, this older woman, she's wearing, you can't see the picture well, but she's wearing big thick wool gloves. She's got the scarf over her head and that big coat. If she was in America shoveling snow and I drove by her, I would say, oh, there's a Russian woman. I would have no doubt that this wasn't a French woman or a Taiwanese woman, but that she's very obviously from Russia. Okay. How about this one? Okay, so everybody's answering people here, and that, for me, that's interesting. What country is this? Okay, so I'm getting a lot of answers from about Asia. Let's see, Polina, you're actually correct. This was in Elista, Kalmykia. Everyone speaks Russian. If you notice the gentleman on the black in the black on the right, he's wearing very Russian style shoes. He's wearing the all black uniform of a Russian man. These are Russians. They're ethnically Mongolian, and their religion is still the Tibetan Buddhism, but the things they do, the food they eat, is very Russian. And this for me, this cultural practice of driving around the cars in the square. I had never seen that before. The first time I'd seen that was in Russia, probably in Kazan, but most cities I went to in Russia um, had this cultural practice of being able to go out and take your kids and take them for a remote control ride in the park. And I thought this was just fantastic. I loved it. Um, yes, Anastasia, cool. That proves Russians don't know how diverse Russia is. Yeah, I was amazed as I traveled around Russia when I drove into Kalmykia. I mean, you think you're entering a new world because there's so much Buddhist temples and architecture, but as soon as you start talking to the people, I mean they're Russian. They're Russian to the core. They're eating Russian food and using Russian turns of phrases and everything like that. But yeah, you can't really tell by their face. You can't tell by the clothing of the man in black that this is probably not Asia. That kind of black, the all black uniform. And then there's a couple boys in the back who are wearing hats, and the only place I've seen that exact hat is in Russia. So anyway, this is for me. This is a cultural practice. How about this one? Tip of the iceberg. Yeah, everyone's answering communities. This is I'm a huge soccer fan, and we would go to Rubin Kazan games every week if we could. And this was the ultras section. And for what's interesting about communities is these ultra fans are a little bit scary. They drink a lot and they light off fireworks and they fight a little bit. But if you go into that crowd and you take out, you can see one young man in there. He's got no shirt on. He's yelling whatever he's yelling. But if you take him out and you put him in this room, he's probably a nice guy. He loves his grandmother. He loves his mother. He works hard. He's got a hardworking job. But you place him in the community, and his morals and his way of speaking, all of those things change. And as he kind of follows along the cultural norms of that community. And so communities is another thing we can isolate and practice. Okay, and this is our final one. Which element is this? Okay, so I'm seeing a lot of perspectives, beliefs. I'm seeing the practice. What practice? What practice do you think this is? We've got quite a few people. Natalia and Nina and Anastasia and Valeria and Irina, you've answered practice. What do you mean by practice? Tamara throws everything out there. Okay. Okay, so the practice is not to work if there's a chance to. Okay, so I think maybe the top part of the iceberg is, again, the thing we can see is don't work if you don't have to, but the underlying belief, the perspective below it is what this proverb is showing us, is that this work will be here on Monday. Why do I have to do it on Friday? Yeah. So for me, again, the proverb is a nice place because it actually takes the perspective and brings it right to the surface where you can look at it in a lot of places on. So yes, I do see the practice, but the proverb usually shows the perspective that is below the practice. And let's see, Irina, you may say laziness, but maybe this person just loves their family more than they love their work. It's hard to say. When I heard this expression in Russia, I absolutely loved it. Okay. Let's see, I want to go back a little bit. I wanted to go back to this framework. And now that we've talked about this framework a little bit, what do you think the benefit? Can you see the benefit of using the cultural elements framework to isolate different cultural elements? Can you see a benefit from that in your teaching? And I'll give a couple minutes. You can add your answers to the public chat, and we can talk about it. Again, what is the benefit? What benefit do you see of using the cultural elements framework to isolate elements of culture for teaching? And in the question section, Irina actually asked, why do we need to divide into elements? Great question. We can talk about that too. So Anastasia says we should start with small things, and also it helps to teach to notice culture. Good. Again, if you're trying to teach culture, which is this, it's the biggest thing in the world. It's bigger than Earth, this culture thing, because every nation, every ethnicity, every area has their own culture. But if we can start with small pieces, it helps us get kind of a bigger picture of the elephant, doesn't it? Svetlana says it simplifies teaching. Yeah, again, we can't teach everything at once, but we can kind of critically look at one or two things at a time. Irina says from small C to big C. So I can, if I'm taking you correctly, if we take these small cultural bits, then we can understand the bigger bits. We can understand kind of the high culture. And Tatiana says we can analyze themes properly with either framework. Okay. Yeah, again, by putting it into smaller pieces, we can analyze probably more easily, more efficiently. It stimulates critical thinking. Yeah, I mean, even I think this job is fairly simple, but it does stimulate you. You have to think about, okay, how does this thing represent something in that culture? Yeah. Okay, great. Teaches the critical thinking. To see the perspectives in the development of any nation. Yeah, I mean, that's what it's all about, is finding those perspectives. And if we can isolate one of the smaller things, then we can begin to ask questions to kind of find the bigger thing. Great. Now I'm going to show you how I use this in a listening lesson. We tried the video yesterday, and it wasn't going to work. I think we saw that 2 weeks ago, that the videos are choppy. Some people can listen to it, some people can't. If you want to reference this later, the video that I use and I'm going to be talking about right now is on the PowerPoint. You can download and watch this on YouTube later. But this is when I bring in culture, one common way I do it is by using video, because video is so rich, and it's visual, and there's the paralinguistic features. You can get all of the language that the two characters or the characters you're using to talk to each other. So for me, it's an efficient way to teach language, but it's also a really efficient way to introduce these cultural elements. What I've been using in the recent years, kind of into the chat, the questions part, I can do that. If I can find it. There's the link in the chat box. I've been using Portlandia because it's about it. This is a TV show that makes fun of my home city, Portland, Oregon. Portland, Oregon's got its own kind of unique subcultures, and this show kind of brings them out and makes fun of them. So Irina, yes, I think it is a matter of practice, and we're going to practice that, and we're going to practice one more time before we do anything else. But again, we usually learn how to do this when we're teaching it, don't we? So again, this is the show that I use, and the clip that I'm about to show you. Um, yeah, I do it as a basic formatted listening lesson with some pre-listening tasks, some gist listening, some specific detail listening, and then some post-listening tasks to wrap it up with. But all of the questions are kind of these critical thinking, culturally based questions. So you're kind of killing two birds with one stone. So here's the opening scene of this clip. Um, there's a young woman, well, not young, they're my age, so they're 35 to 40-year-olds, sitting in a cafe, typical cafe in Portland, Oregon, talking to each other. And the girl says, "Well, I did go on a date the other day." And her friend says, "Oh, with who?" And then the conversation goes from there. And they talk about kind of the bad romance or the bad luck romance that this girl has had. She ends up going on a date with a boy who's got a tattoo on his arm, but she doesn't like the tattoo. And she likes tattoos, but she just doesn't like this tattoo. So she breaks up with him um, because of that. So what I do first is I show my students 10 seconds of the scene, and you can watch 10 seconds of this link on YouTube later. And then I stop it and I ask them the question that I just asked you. What cultural elements can you see in this 10 seconds? Um, so I'll extend that question to you. Looking at that scene, looking at the little coffee shop, the first question, what products can you see? Glasses? Okay, yeah. And they're particular glasses too. They're kind of the very thick framed glasses, aren't they? Guitars, there's pictures on the wall. Yeah, very typical cafe. Pictures on the wall, I think the very typical coffee house pictures because it's not great art. It's just something to put your eyes on. It lets you relax. It's kind of cool because it's got a musical theme. A cup and glasses, water on the table. That's something you don't get in Russia, but in America, every time you sit down, you get somebody will serve you a glass of water. Other people, there's a sofa in the coffee shop that you can relax on. Um, yes, in American cafes, the water is always free. The different kinds of furniture that are there, good. How about can you say anything about the haircuts? Like the woman on the left, is that a typical? Would you see that haircut in Russia? Boring people. Yeah, Valerie. I think the clothes are a definitely a cultural product. And he's wearing kind of an army jacket. She's wearing a kind of a business coat, but she's wearing jeans too. It's kind of business, but it's kind of casual. The communication probably isn't the product. And we'll talk about maybe that would be more of a practice because it's actually them doing something. And the haircut is okay. Okay, there's a judgment. But for me, the haircut is something that I would see probably on somebody that age in a city. I think it identifies her as a mid-30s urban person. I wouldn't see that on a girl who lives in the country in America, but maybe more of a city person. Um, what else do you see that nobody noticed? On the back table. There's a to-go coffee cup. Um, that's starting to become more popular in Russia, but when I first got there, I think no restaurants that I saw had to-go coffee cups, and people in Russia generally don't walk down the street holding coffee. In America, we quite often do. The girl on the sofa is back there texting. The woman is disappointed. She does look a little disappointed. Okay, so those are our products. How about the practices? Basically, what are they doing? What are the people doing? Going out for coffee? Yeah, absolutely. The boy's reading. He might even be studying, but he's using a cafe to do it. So the practice is reading a book or studying in a cafe. Socializing, meeting with a friend in a cafe. Yeah. Um, Texting in a cafe. What are they talking about? Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a dialogue, but what specifically are they talking about? What's the practice? There we are. Arena and Anastasia are starting to get a little closer to it. Yeah. And Nellie's talking about it. Yeah. So we have a man and a woman, and they're talking about her relationships or her kind of romantic life. Um, Obviously, it's much more visual or obvious when you watch the video. Um, but when I showed this to Russians, this was kind of the thing that stuck out to them most: is why is the woman talking to the man about her relationship? What is their relationship? And people were guessing that maybe he was gay or maybe he was an ex-husband that somehow she felt comfortable talking to him. And yeah, Natalia, they're not dating because she's talking about her date with somebody else. So they're just friends. They're friends of some sort. It's we'd say a platonic relationship. Okay, the next one, the kind of persons we talked about this a little bit. Um, I'll let you fill it in. She flirts. Oh, Valerie, she's flirting with him. Eugenia, yes, they are in the friend zone. Hmm. Yulia thinks it's an ex-husband. Uh, okay, so come back. What types of people? What can you say about these two people? Oh, you're killing me. Okay, middle-aged. Um, Again, how old are they? They're middle-aged. What do they do? What do you think their jobs might be? Somebody said that maybe he is the doctor. What else? Can you imagine what her kind of job might be? Is she a farmer? Does she work with machines? Um, yeah, they're in their 40s. She looks older in those days. So somebody, Yulia says they work in an office. So we're talking about some sort of maybe urban professional, white collar, as Svetlana says. And how are you basing that on? Are you basing that on their clothes? Are you basing that on their hairdressing? Their style is what I wanted to say. Teacher, driver, teachers, yeah. Anyway, we're coming up with a lot of professions that are white collar, educated jobs, and I'm guessing we're basing that, yeah, like Yulia says, on their clothes and on their style. But we can tell a lot from that. The boy in the back in the white shirt, maybe he's a student. I mean, he's dressed much more casually, and he's reading that book. The girl on the couch in the back, I don't know. We could make some guesses about her too. Lawyers, scientists, computer programs, again, anyway, but very professional. We're all educated and professional people here. Mid 40s, urban. Okay. Communities. I I had trouble finding a community here. Middle-aged, urban people, possibly. I would need maybe more clues to be able to pull out community information here. How about this one? Let's dig a little deeper in can you come up with any perspectives, some sort of beliefs that lie behind the products or the practices? The sentence stem would be something like um, maybe Americans believe that. Americans believe that is maybe your sentence stem for your perspective. Valerie's her haircut is good. She wants to look pleasant. So somewhere the perspective is looking pleasant or taking care of your looks is advantageous to your professional life, something like that. So Nellie is offering our first perspective is that friendship between men and women exists, or I'd offer you the word platonic friendship. Oh my lord, can't spell today. Tatiana says someone can help with their private life. Yeah, I absolutely. I think that's a perspective that even maybe a man can help a woman with aspects of her private life. Americans believe that. Okay. Um, Eugenia, dating someone reflects social success. Interesting. Interesting. So hmm. So I take it to mean because she's talking about her dating that she's kind of showing her success as a person. And Tamara says, stay always on good terms. So if in fact this was an ex-husband, ex-boyfriend situation, then Americans believe that couples that date on good terms after they've broken up. And we can definitely see that. For my wife and I, we have a very strong disagreement about that because in America, that's a perspective. And in Japan, that is not a perspective. Okay, so we've gotten some kind of nice ideas out of that, and I think at this stage we don't need to go too deep into it. After I have collected kind of these cultural products, after the class and I have discussed these different cultural elements, let's see, and these are some of the things that I saw, but you guys said basically the same thing. Yeah, you said the same thing as I did here. I don't think I added anything new. And actually, you had some better ones than me. The Tamara's about you should always be on good terms. I thought that was very clever. So this is basically acts as kind of the gist listening. The first listening of the video, they do this. We discuss these different cultural elements, and then I ask the question. Well, actually, then we watch the whole video and we do this again. We go through the different products and practices, and then I ask the question, what is the most important or what is the most significant cultural element from this scene? Maybe the one that creates the most mystery for you. So that's my step 2. I determine the mystery and answers I've heard in the past. Why does she break off the relationship because of its tattoo? Why does the girl discuss her relationship with her male friend? Do Americans really kiss on the first date? And why do they date outside the park? And actually, this question, when I was in Russia, this was kind of the main kind of mystery from the scenes is why are they discussing this? Why can a man and a woman discuss this? So this is the place that we would use the next framework out to talk about this one cultural element. So now I'm going to forget everything else except for this one element of why does the girl discuss her relationship with her male. We watch the video now again with this in mind, and then we go to the next framework, which is called the knowings framework, and I'll show the whole thing to you in a little bit. But we start out with these 3 questions. Consider the most important cultural element, which is why can the man and woman be talking to each other when they're not dating? We watch the video, they answer what happened, what did you see or hear, and what are the details? So this looks like just a specific details listening task, doesn't it? We spend good time on this. We may have to watch the video twice, or we may have to watch small sections of it twice so that the students can get the details out of it. After we've done that, then we move on to the interpretation part. And now I think because they've described the scene so thoroughly, they know exactly what each character said at those points. We can move into the more critical thinking stage, and that these questions dig at that. What does it mean? What does it mean that a man and woman can talk to each other like that? So obviously something like Americans have platonic relationships, or Americans think it's good to stay on good terms with your exes, and you can provide good advice to each other. How can you explain it? Again, this is where one student will give you one part of the elephant, and another student will give you a different part of the elephant. A third will give you a third part of the elephant, and you need to put the whole thing together for them, or have them put it together themselves. What are the insider's perspectives? The insider is the middle-aged American. And so you're having your students guess on or discuss what they think an American of this age thinks about this cultural element. Then you move to outsiders' perspectives, which is basically anyone else. A Russian university student is not a middle-aged American. So they can offer their perspectives on it. What do you believe about it? And then how does this compare with your culture or other cultures? And what I heard overwhelmingly in Russia is this does not happen. Except among kind of some teachers who were like 20, 21, 22, 23, they would raise their hand and go, no, I can do this with my male friends. And so there was kind of a difference between the cultures of the generations I was seeing in Russia as I was traveling around talking to people. But then if you have students between the cultures of the generations I was seeing in Russia as I was traveling around talking to people. But then if you have students from different ethnicities within your classroom, each one of them can talk about how this compares with their culture. I think maybe a Muslim and a Christian would have different ideas about how this compares to their culture. And I'm not absolutely sure. I'm not Muslim or Christian, and I don't know what's happening in Tartar society, so I can't answer that specifically. But I know, like in Japan, this is very different, and in Taiwan, this is a very different culture. So this is a nice place to bring kind of that cross-cultural explorations out, and allowing students to express themselves about this. Okay, so again, this step 4, this takes a long time. This is a nice long discussion. And this is more of a post-listening task, because I don't think the students had to watch this video clip again to answer these questions. Maybe they did, but usually this is kind of the post or the after stage. The final stage of the knowings framework is kind of getting the response of the students. So what do you think? How do you feel? How does this affect you? What more do you need to know? And that last one, what more do you need to know, is kind of at the heart. Because remember when I presented why do you teach culture, I want to create open-minded, questioning people. And so I spend a lot of time with them creating questions about that topic. In this case, I'm an expert on Portland culture because I'm a 32-year-old American from Portland. So I can answer their questions fairly confidently. So if you're thinking about bringing culture in, I would, if you want to be able to answer the questions confidently, bring in culture that you know, and that that you've experienced and you feel quite confident with. Or you have to be satisfied being kind of blind with the students and being another one of those blind people touching the elephant and adding your opinion, but not making your opinion kind of the word of God, but just another voice among all these other voices that together, again, you're co-constructing this idea of what this culture means. It is very convenient when I do know the culture, because this is a really nice post task for them to ask me questions, and then we can spend another 4 or 5 minutes discussing it. And these questions also allow students to kind of go, well, this makes me uncomfortable. I don't like this. Or, oh, I wish our culture was more like this. I mentioned earlier, my Chinese students do not really do critical thinking for the large part. And so they were kind of stuck on the level of, oh, that I don't like that, and then kind of ending. So my job is really to push them further and further and further, and kind of challenge their thinking, and not letting my students just say, I don't like it. But when they say that, for me to go in and try to get those questions deeper and deeper and deeper to get them to think about it, because lots of students, as you know, are very satisfied to say, well, I don't know. Yeah. So our job is to challenge that. Yes, I believe that. Okay. So just I wanted to recap that for you a little bit. We'll think about that lesson. As a listening lesson, there was a gist listening. We use the cultural elements framework in the first 10 seconds of the video. We listened for more general information. We isolated the most important cultural element. We listened for details. We did some post listening. And then my question for you is, if we had watched this video and we had gone through these questions, what homework would you give to try to solidify their learning? Or to have the students kind of slow down their thinking and put their thoughts on page? What kind of homework do you think you would give them to follow a lesson like this up? And you can share those answers in the chat box with us, please. Hmm. I agree, Yulia. Pictures are incredibly powerful, and they have so much information in them. And pictures can also be very visual. Often there's no right or wrong answer, which again is kind of one of the key elements of critical thinking. Irina, find a similar video. Sure. Maybe find a similar video from their culture that shows the kind of a similar situation, but done in a more from their culture's perspective. Yeah, Eugenia, to make up a dialogue, and dialogues are incredibly powerful. I'm going to show you an alternative in a minute that I did with dialogues. Yeah. Ah, nice, Nelly. Good. And I think Nelly, a lot of things would come from that if they made their own version of that. They could make, there's a million different ways they could do that. They could do it just as it was. They could do it from their cultural perspective. They could do it from maybe different relationships. Maybe it's two women that are having the discussion, or it's two men having the discussion, and how would that discussion be different? Analyze another video or picture, absolutely. Then Natalia, I often do what Natalia asks, is reflect in written form on the questions they ask. Yeah. For me, that helps them. For me, I really like them to be able to put their thoughts down on paper and think about it again, kind of in the quiet of homework time. Because often they get better ideas. Students get better ideas if they're outside of the classroom. Write an essay about friendship, what friendship means. Absolutely. Describe the same situation, Natalia. Yeah. Reflect in writing. Nelly's other idea, make up a similar conversation within their cultural framework. Good. Absolutely. Make a video about your culture. C&C. Fantastic. If your students make those, please send them to me. I would love to see them. The same situation on the national soil. Fantastic. And like I said, if you have many different cultures within your area, like Kazan, I could do a ethnic Russian and an ethnic Tartar one, or even kind of a mixed one would be really, really interesting to do. Read an essay about the boy with the book and the girl on the phone. I like that. Looking at what are those side characters doing? What do they think of this conversation? A piece of advice to the woman. Oh, that'd be fantastic. Yes, Tatiana, I give double exclamation points for that too. Okay, so I don't know. For me, your ideas coming from this, you know, I can feel your enthusiasm for this, and I can feel that this is kind of turning your teaching wheels. And for me, that's what teaching culture does, is it kind of gets us excited about doing this sort of thing. So it's nice to see that. Interview some people, write an essay. Okay, interview some people. Interviewing people would be good too, and that would be fun to do on tape. Okay, now where am I? So this is the knowings framework by itself, and the whole. So you can get a look at how the whole framework works. And the way that we used it today, box number 1 is again the gist questions. Box number 2 is actually, box number 1 is not gist. Box number 1 is the specific details, getting the whole meaning. Number 2 is 2 and 3 are both post tasks. The first box is if the person is actually participating, and this is if I have my students get up and do a role play of some sort of cultural element that they've decided to bring in. So I'll show you one other thing that I've done. And I do this quite often, and it takes me no time to plan, and you have to be a little nervous because you don't know how the performance is going to go, and if there's going to be really good kind of meaty cultural elements coming out of it. But in my experience, there really has been. So I asked 2 students to role play different greetings in their culture by using English. Have them rehearse. I usually make them go in the hallway and rehearse so we can't see. And then they perform it for the whole group, who take notes and then answer the questions in the knowings framework. So they go and they answer these questions and these questions and then these questions as they listen to 2 of their students perform this dialogue. I did this in Russia in Kazan with 2 of my Russian teachers, and I said, come in, it's Monday morning. You haven't spoken to each other on the weekend. What's the conversation? I don't speak Russian. I don't know. It was an honest question to me. And they came in, and the first woman says, hello, how are you? And the other woman says, I'm not so good. I'm very busy. My students this term, they're not studying very hard. And my son is sick at home. You know, I have all this work to do, but my son is sick. How about you? And the other one is, me too. My students this term, they're not working very hard. And let's see, my grandmother is sick, so I'm having to do all the cooking at home. Oh, things are not good right now. And then they started talking about the weekend, and I was sitting there just with a look of shock on my face. What's going on? Really? This is how you start your conversation? Because it sounded, as an American, it sounded so negative to me. But as they explained it, and as we were going through the framework, and the insider's perspectives, and let's see, how do you feel, and things like that, it came out that the one woman goes, well, I know she's very busy. And if I say, oh, my life is great, I'm going to make her feel bad. And the other woman said, oh, I know that too. I know she's very busy right now. So I wanted to say something kind of low so she feels better. And I just about had a tear drop down my cheek. It was so beautiful. So again, the first impression you see of this Russian greeting is, oh my God, they're so negative. You know, the common stereotype that people have of Russians is often, oh, they're so negative. But then underlying that, the perspective is that we're taking care of each other. And so it's actually this kind of really beautiful thing to me. But I wouldn't have known that had I not gone through the knowings framework. Had I not had these students do this demonstration for me, I would have always felt, oh, God, they're so negative here. But in fact, it was really beautiful how they were taking care of each other. So for me personally, I thought these demonstrations and using this framework can be very, very powerful for kind of changing your awareness. Complaining is okay. Yep. Okay. So one thing I had 2 Saudi Arabian students. They greeted each other. They come in, they shake hands immediately. They kiss each other 4 times on each, first on one cheek, then 3 times on the other cheek, and then their dialogue was something. This was their dialogue. Khalil, hey, how are you? Mazin says, how are you? I'm good, man. How about you? Good. But then the first topic is their family. how's your family? And usually they know each other. So, oh, how's your cousin? And how's your father? Oh, how's your, they really go on about their family. Then they talk about, the question is, what did you do? What did you do last weekend or something like that? So again, this was very eye-opening for my students from other cultures to see this. And it also made some of the Asians very, very uncomfortable because of the kissing on the cheeks. Um, but we could turn it around and point out to the Asians that, Asian boys will hold each other's hands as they walk down the street. Even teenagers will do this. So there's things that make each other uncomfortable. Anyway, the setup for the dialogue takes 5 minutes, but it's a 20-minute conversation afterwards. And really, really important for getting out, for creating this kind of cross-cultural understanding and creating questions. Nellie questions whether we really have these noble perspectives. You think my teachers were lying to me, huh? Different parts of the elephant. Okay, and then there's the knowings framework again. This is, I go through this when I do the dialogue. And I think so. This is my next question for you. I've shown you the two frameworks. I've shown you the knowing framework, or the cultural elements framework, and I've shown you the knowings framework, where we ask all the questions. The way I showed you how I use them as basically a listening task, and it could be a speaking task. As those last students, do you think these frameworks could be used to teach reading? Do you think they could be used to teach writing or speaking? Valerian, you say speaking. Can you give an example? Tatiana says proofreading. Why not? Okay, so I'm seeing that these frameworks could be used for kind of a variety of purposes. Yeah, and I believe that too. I think these frameworks can be very, very useful. I think often we have our students do extensive reading. It'd be really nice to go into a passage of reading and pull that out and analyze that carefully for the culture that's within it. Yeah, like Natalia says, analyzing the text. Um, yes, Jennifer, absolutely, to help people read more critically, which is again something we're always kind of pushing our students to do and not exactly sure if we're accomplishing that. Good. There's lots of discussions, obviously lots of discussions that can come out of this, and creating role plays, actually analyzing the language. I didn't talk about that here. There's lots of mistakes in here, and so there's lots of ways to analyze this language and make it more correct, or then transferring it over to what two Americans would say to each other. So there's lots of lexical things and grammatical things you can just do a basic English lesson out of these things. Here's another question for you. How would you adapt this lesson for your students or even for younger learners? Hmm. Eugenia, maybe you're an introvert. It sounds like you. It sounds like you. Sounds like it. You like to help them make up their minds before speaking or writing. I think that's very important. Oh, Valerie, that's a fantastic idea. I wouldn't have thought of that. But puppets doing simple dialogues. Oh, puppets. I wish I taught kids again. I haven't taught kids in a long time. Um, let's not talking about other topics. Sure, absolutely. I mean, there's so many topics to explore. It's a big elephant. Similar dialogues, integrate with topics on the curriculum. Yeah, I mean, like Anastasia says, we're told what to teach, or it's determined by the textbook. But adding these frameworks and using these frameworks to further analyze what we're already doing is a way to kind of enrich the learning. Alicia, Alicia, is that how I say your name? Find a cartoon. I love that. And Russian has some really famous cartoons. It would be really kind of fascinating to use these to analyze Russian cartoons versus Japanese versus American or something like that. Colored pictures, cartoons. Try to put them in issues. Sure. So Anastasia brings up a good point. It's difficult to find videos in English if we want to teach about Russian cultural diversity, which is a thing, right? So I mean, could you use a Russian video? Of course, you've got Russian TV shows that kind of do the same thing. I mean, for me, I don't see a problem with watching the video in Russian but discussing it in English, or watching it in English, transcribing it into English, or watching it in Russian, having the students make that same dialogue or that same discussion into English, work on the lexis, work on the grammar, and then use the frameworks to discuss it. There's probably things that are translated here. I don't know. Ask your students if there's anything dubbed. Make their own sense. Continue the dialogue. Yeah, I like continuing the dialogue. Pretend to be different nationalities. Do some research. Dramatize greetings for others to guess. That's a really nice one too. And so again, we're getting kind of lots and lots of ideas out of this, and that's really nice. That's nice to see. This is my last question for you. This is my last question for you. What elements of Russian culture do you think your students would benefit from thinking more deeply about? Yeah, I agree, Oksana. So, Oksana, can you give me maybe a more specific situation? For me, again, I can think of that Tartar or the Russian boy saying that Tartar is stupid and it's useless and it's a worthless language. For me, that's a tolerance issue, and that's a great place to start a discussion um, about these things. And this is pride in Russia, sure. Friendship, different kinds of friendship, absolutely. Um, can you be a little more specific? Can you think of an element rather than kind of this big overarching friendship, but kind of a cultural element we could talk about? I understand about traditions underlying religious holidays. About I understand about traditions underlying religious holidays. Absolutely. hmm Eugenia talks about national diversity. I'm glad I included that picture. Yeah, folklore is a great place to start, especially for kids. Yeah, friendship and respecting each other, relations like that, manners. Okay. Yeah, and um, you might, if you have any native speakers around, you might ask them what their ideas are, because I think they're going to have kind of a very different perspective. Different things will stick out to them about Russian culture than will for you, because you've grown up in the culture, you know the culture, it's your blood. So maybe it's harder to notice some things. I know for me, when I come back to America, I notice things much more than when I'm just living here. But I would start with the very, very positive, some just, absolutely beautiful things about Russian culture. One of the things that my wife and I always talk about is how many Russians go to the ballet and how many kids go to the ballet. In America, I'd never been to the ballet before. Well, maybe one time, but it's not a thing that a lot of kids go to. But I went to so many in Russia where all the kids were there and they're with their parents, and it's time to dress up. And I thought that was a really beautiful thing. So, Anastasia, what do you think, Andy? What is your perspective? What is my perspective on what? I mean, can you be more specific on Russian culture? I'm guessing. Mm. Yeah, elements of Russian culture. Yeah. So for me, there were lots of positive things. I remember helping a woman cross the road, and that was something that you see Russians do all the time. Is if there's an older woman and she's got a shopping bag and she's climbing the steps, quite often somebody, a young person, an older, will help them. They'll grab them by the arm and help them up the stairs. And I did that one day, helping a woman across the street, and I think she kissed my hand, and I just thought the whole exchange was beautiful. In America, there's kind of a more distance between people in that situation. I feel we tend to not interact with strangers as much. So that was one thing that I thought was really pretty. The other one thing that I kind of a thing that I thought maybe a little negative about Russia was when people smoke and then they throw it on the ground. But as an American, that drives me absolutely crazy because it makes the ground all dirty. So those would be two things. If these were my students, those might be two places that I might explore. I would definitely take a look at the driving culture. The driving culture between our two countries is very, very different. Um, I think the Russian appreciation for high culture um, is nice. I mean, it was like I said, it was nice to see the participation in that. And I think a lot of people have the idea that Americans don't, they don't read, or they don't go to art museums or something like that. And I think so that's an idea that if I was teaching American culture, that's something I would maybe bring to them because that's something they don't know. And I say that because I had a Russian teacher who had come to America on one of the State Department programs. And that was one of those things she mentioned. She's like, wow, Americans, they're not all fat. A lot of them are outside exercising all the time. The bookstores are full of young people. Whereas in Russia, they're not full of young people, or something to that effect. Like behavior with strangers, yeah. Polite behavior with strangers, absolutely. Hospitality, the Russian hospitality is off the hook. Going to a Russian person's house for dinner and having so much food and just feeling so welcome is beautiful. Um, how to earn it, how to spend it, attitude towards the law. Yeah, I think attitude towards the law, Svetlana, would be a good one. Tatiana, comparing proverbs and sayings. Yeah, I think we have to. It's hard to find good ones sometimes, but there's easy ones like "Oh, time is money," and like the American one, "Oh, time is money," and like the American one. So it sounds like there's lots of things we could explore. Um, is that Alexi? Alexi, great idea and very specific to give a video task. Yeah, I love the idea of sending the students out to actually maybe they could find a piece of culture out on the streets, something that's happening, and videotape that, bring that back into the class to analyze. I think that's really nice. Um, so this is usually I'm gonna, just for time's sake, I'm gonna skip onto this. We're at 10:25. I'm gonna let you go in 5 minutes. Is it any questions at this point? You have for me or you have for each other? Yes, my tea is cold. Fantastic then. Okay, let's see, I can give you, you'll see my email is on the bottom of the next page. Absolutely, I would, of course, love to hear from you. I have a blog, but I don't ever update it anymore. No, and often I don't get questions, but I mean, the comments throughout were good. I really enjoyed some of the comments and some of the ideas we heard. I think you could kind of feel the wheels turning as this is going on. So if you do have anything, the PowerPoint should be available, right, to Anastasia? You said it's going to be on the website. So thank you everybody for coming. I really enjoyed this time. So if you do have anything, the PowerPoint should be available, right, to Anastasia? You said it's going to be on the website. So
I believe that the PowerPoint will be available tomorrow with the recording of all the webinar that we have had today. Maybe someone would like to broadcast and speak live to Andy. So if you would like, please send a request for broadcasting.
okay.
So I can't see any requests. Anyway, the webinar will be available in recording tomorrow at diverserussia.ru tomorrow. I will make the recording and cut it and trim it, and I'll place it at the site tomorrow. So if you or maybe your colleagues would like to watch it, so you can do that tomorrow. Okay, Nastya asks me to announce the next webinar. It's going to be in a week. Yeah, it's going to be in a week. So it will start at 8 p.m. Moscow time also, and we'll have a chance to talk to Tony Hall and to listen to the speaker who's going to dwell on critical thinking and creative thinking. So you can register for this webinar at the link provided in the timetable at a schedule that has been sent to all those who want to participate.
I hope
so you can join us next week.
I'm reading the thank you.
So maybe Andy, you would like to say something to the participants.
Working in Russia, how much I miss being there. So thank you everybody. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you box, and I just remind you.
I hope so. I would love to. Apparently, I have to come to Tula.
Come back.
Places I haven't been. So, and I enjoy working with Russian teachers very much. Again, I know your job is hard, but
I hope
that I
would love to.
The hard work you do with your students. It's changing their lives. So keep doing it.
So, and I enjoy working with Russian teachers very much. Again, I know your job is hard, but know that I very much appreciate the hard work of your students. It's changing their lives. So keep doing it.